Hello, and welcome to a Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness video, where today I'm going to be using the Wigglytuff and Clefable lines to beat the game. Now, I do think that these two are going to do very well, however, they do have the small issue of starting out as babies, so they are going to have very low stats, and therefore struggle in the early game, and even when they evolve, Jigglypuff and Clefairy aren't all that great stats-wise either, so it may be a while before they actually start dealing decent damage and taking hits very well. But with that, let's go ahead and move on to their stats and move pool. Cleffa has 50 HP, 25 attack, 28 defense, 45 special attack, 55 special offense, and 15 speed. And Igglybuff has 90 HP, 30 attack, 15 defense, 40 special attack, 20 special offense, and 15 speed. Now both of them mostly get access to normal type moves through level up, and in fact their TM list is almost identical other than Cleffa getting Calm Mind, which really won't come into play because it's locked behind Area 7 of Mount Battle. Their tutor list is exactly the same. The only real difference comes in the level up moveset, in which Cleffa gets a few better support moves as well as Meteor Mash if I wanted to go all the way up to 45 with Clefairy, which is just not going to happen. And Igglybuff has some pretty decent moves if I were to level up Jigglypuff to level 44 to get Hyper Voice, a spread normal type move at 90 base power, which I could do, but I don't really see myself doing. However, it does have one amazing move, and that is Rollout, which is just incredibly powerful because it's a rock type move in a game where the final boss uses the 3 legendary birds. Anyway, with that, let's go ahead and move on to our Igglybuff in particular, which has a lonely nature, raising its attack but lowering its defense. And that extra attack could come in handy if I decide to make this one more physically offensive. Now it gets the Cute Charm ability, which on contact by an opponent will sometimes infatuate them. And of course it gets Sing, Charm, Defense Curl, and Pound by level 10. So now moving on to Cleffa, it has a lax nature, raising its defense but lowering its special defense, which it's already going to be quite tanky later on anyway, so it's not too big a deal. It has the Cute Charm ability as well, and it gets Pound, Charm, Encore, and Sing by level 10. Now let's move on to something I hadn't really considered, but there is only the Moon Shard in this game. There are no Moonstones. So I'm going to base their evolutions about the time that other Pokemon with similar base stat totals would do it, which would place Wigglytuff at level 27 and Clefable at level 35. Now the thing is that because the Moonstones allow you to evolve anytime, I'm just using that as the minimum. I'm allowed to go further than that if I'd like, which I don't think I will, but I could. Anyway, that's enough preamble. Let's go ahead and get to the run, and the first thing I'm going to do is teach Igglybuff Seismic Toss. That way it's dealing a lot more damage and will get us through the early game a bit quicker. And the thing is that these two Pokemon are also friendship evolutions, so they will evolve whenever they reach a friendship of 220, I believe. And because that takes an extremely long time, I have just decided to use the Eevee's base friendship in this game, which I believe is 216. That way I can do a couple fights, level up, and then evolve and get on my way with this run and not be bogged down too much by the beginning. So with that being said, I figure that this is the best place to show off how these two Pokemon do, is against the fellow baby trainer. And they make it through fairly easily. So with that, they level up once and they both evolve, giving me Jigglypuff and Clefairy, which are going to be a huge upgrade, but they're not that big of an upgrade. Clefairy has 70 HP, 45 attack, 48 defense, 60 special attack, 65 special defense, and 35 speed, while Jigglypuff has 115 HP, 45 attack, 20 defense, 45 special attack, 25 special defense, and 20 speed. So they are both incredibly slow, don't hit very hard, and also don't have that great of defenses. But I do think that it's going to be good enough for the early game, though I might be outsped by some of these Pokemon that are just a bit faster. So I can see that being a bit of an issue, but anyway, of course with our two Pokemon in tow, we get through the early game very easily. In fact, the old man really isn't all that much of a threat, even despite my relatively low defensive stats. They're not really doing that much damage, and so I'm able to take him down fairly quickly. At level 14, Jigglypuff gets disabled, and I teach that over Charm, which probably wasn't the best idea, and then we move on to the Power Rangers. I decide to fight Brown today, simply because he's only got 2 Pokemon, and I don't think he's going to do all that much damage, except he one-shots Jigglypuff with his Shadow Ball toy. And so eventually, I am taken down. So I decide to take this time to do just a little bit of training in Mount Battle, just to get a few more levels, and I decide to fight Green instead because all of his Pokemon are a bit lower leveled, and I should be able to handle their attacks a bit better. Oh, and Clefairy gets Follow Me, a very great move. Anyway, with that, let's go ahead and start just a little bit of rambling. If you are enjoying this video so far, consider liking, and if you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Now, a consequence I hadn't really considered about doing a lot of videos in advance, or at least the playthroughs, is that I actually have to schedule things out, and unfortunately my videos go pretty far into October before even getting to Spooky Month. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to rearrange a few and work on a few of the spookier runs, that way I can get October feeling a bit more frightening rather than just a normal month, and I'll push those off to November. Anyway, with that being said, we beat Green, and at level 19 Jigglypuff gets Rollout. Now Rollout is an amazing move, and with Defense Curl its damage is actually doubled, so it can be incredibly powerful to the point where I accidentally one-shot this Numble that I wanted to steal the charcoal item from. But anyway, we move on to Lavrina. She leads with the Love Disc and a Beautifly, and using the Defense Curl rollout method, I can almost surely take down this Beautifly in a single turn. Now there is one issue with using rollout, and that's that it's only 90% accurate, so there will be times where it just misses, which is very unfortunate because every single time you use rollout it doubles in power. So once it gets to the end, it will become very powerful. However, if it misses, it gets reset back to the original power it was, which can be kind of annoying. Now, Clefairy is actually a great Pokemon to have paired with Jigglypuff because it has Follow Me, allowing Jigglypuff a better opportunity to actually get off the Defense Curl and Rollout strategy. Unfortunately, Delcatty takes down Jigglypuff this turn, and unfortunately, those Shadow Rushes are doing quite a bit of damage, and Clefairy can't really do that much in return, so eventually I go down, but a fairly decent first attempt. Now moving on to the third attempt, and the thing I realized is that Beautifly is not a threat almost whatsoever, especially when I use Charm. Then it's forced to use Thief, a much weaker move that does almost nothing to either of my Pokemon. And then I can also set up the rollout on the Love Disc. Because it's going to be taking the attacks a lot better than the Beautifly, it means that I'm able to build up more power with rollout, so when I eventually get to Delcatty, as long as it doesn't target Jigglypuff, I can take it down. So I set it up, and now I am at a 2 rollout and a 3 for the Roselia. I decided to set up a Follow Me just in case Roselia tried to set up Leech Seed on Jigglypuff. Roselia goes down in a single rollout, and I decided not to learn Defense Curl on Clefairy. And then out comes Delcatty, and because the Clefairy is still alive, I set up another Follow Me. Shadow Rush comes out, taking down the Clefairy, but I don't really need it anymore. And Rollout gets a crit and takes down Delcatty, though I think it wasn't necessary. And a final Rollout takes down the Beautifly. Now, of course, you can't have a Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness video without the obligatory Mirror B. Hello Mirror B, how you doing today? We actually do want the Voltorb here for the magnet item. Because our TM list is so expansive, it's probably useful to have, and I decided to go ahead and use my first Moonstone, now that Jigglypuff has reached level 27, to evolve into Wigglytuff. And with an evolution, of course, means an increase in stats, because it has 140 HP, 70 attack, 45 defense, 75 special attack, 50 special defense, and 45 speed. So it has a huge HP stat, which should hopefully offset the lackluster defenses of 45 and 50, which is just kind of unfortunate. Its attacking stats aren't that strong either, and with a base 45 speed stat, it is going to be outsped by basically anything fast in the late game, unless I overlevel quite a bit. So unfortunately, I'm not sure how well Wigglytuff is going to stack up, but we move on and we go ahead and pick up the routes for the Twisted Spoon item, and then to the Realgam Tower to go pick up my 2 favorite TMs, Hidden Power and Protect. And of course I'm going to teach Hidden Power right away to both of them, in which Clefable has Hidden Power Flying and Wigglytuff has Hidden Power Ice. So while Flying isn't actually all that interesting because the bugs and grass types aren't actually all that much of an issue, Hidden Power Ice could come in handy. However, because these two get access to both Ice Beam and Blizzard, I might end up going for Blizzard if I need that extra Ice type damage. But anyway, I go ahead and teach Body Slam to Wigglytuff right now over Hidden Power, and if I need, I can pick up Hidden Power again later. I pick up the Swine Up for the Never Belt Ice item, and I teach Clefairy Ice Beam over Hidden Power and go into the battle against Snaddle. He leads with a Lantern and a Quagsire, and I go for Body Slam and Ice Beam into the Quagsire, which Ice Beam does half, and Body Slam luckily finishes it off. He then sends out his Shadow Lunatone, and unfortunately because both of my Pokemon are very slow, I'm not able to outspeed it, so it's able to set up Shadow Sky, which is very unfortunate because I am going to be taking chip damage every turn. And unfortunately, despite their best efforts, both of my Pokemon are unable to take down Lunatone in a single turn, so it is going to use Shadow Wave, which does quite a lot of damage, getting a crit on a Clefairy and dealing a decent amount of damage to Wigglytuff. I finish it off on the following turn, bringing out Cast Form. I go for Ice Beam into it, dealing half its health. Fruity Pebbles rain down, but unfortunately I am getting fairly weak. There is still a chance I could win. Weather Ball comes out, taking Wigglytuff down to 12, and unfortunately Wigglytuff goes down. I get a Charm off on Cast Form, but way too late. I go for Ice Beam. Weather Ball hits Clefairy, and a Shockwave comes out, taking me down to 1 HP. Ice Beam is able to finish off the Cast Form, revealing his final Pokemon, that being a Metang, but the Fruity Pebbles come down and finish me off. So I decide to go do Mount Battle Area 2, that way I can get the TM for Water Pulse to deal super effective damage against the Lunatone instead of just neutral damage, and hopefully that should fix any issues I have. And at the same time, Clefairy now hits level 35, and I am allowed to evolve it into Clefable. Now, I could have leveled it up a couple more levels and gotten Moonlight, but I don't think I'm really going to use it. So now with Clefable evolved, it has 95 HP, 70 attack, 73 defense, 85 special attack, 90 special defense, and 60 speed. And while the stats aren't incredible, at least it has decent bulk on the special side and also a fairly decent special attack stat as well. The attack and defense is a bit low, but that's alright, and it's balanced all by a 95 base HP, which is fairly solid. Unfortunately, only having 60 base speed is going to make it quite slow, but I will be over leveled, so that shouldn't be too much of an issue. Anyway, we go back into the battle against Snaddle once again, and I go for Ice Beam into Quagsire just as before, and Body Slam finishes it off, and then out comes his dreaded Lunatone, which I am hoping that Water Pulse does take down in a single hit. So I go for it, and Water Pulse doesn't, but it does do quite a bit of damage. Unfortunately, Wigglytuff is still slower than it, so it's able to set up Shadow Sky, which does mean I will still be taking the Fruity Pebble chip damage. Out comes the Cast Form, and I go for Ice Beam into it, nearly taking it down in a single hit. Body Slam finishes it off, and then out comes his final Pokemon, Metang. And this is another reason for picking up the move Water Pulse. It's just that it's neutral damage against Metang, whereas I really wouldn't have much of anything other than Seismic Toss to take it down. And Water Pulse does take it down to half, and Seismic Toss finishes it off. Now all that's left is the Lantern, which hasn't been doing really any damage this entire fight. So of course it goes down after just a few hits. Pound takes it down to half, and Body Slam finishes it off. At the SS Libra, I pick up the TM for Flamethrower, and I teach that over Pound. Now moving on to the battle against Gonzap, he leads with an Electrode and a Nuzleaf, and on the first turn the Nuzleaf always goes for Fake Out, but luckily the Electrode is going for Sonic Boom this time instead of Spark, so I don't really need to worry about it too much, and because both of my Pokemon have very high health, it's not going to be that much of an issue. Now I do decide to get rid of Electrode anyway because it does outspeed, and I really don't want that threat around, but it was an option to keep it around. Anyway, I take down the Nuzleaf, then out comes Vileplume, which I take down in a single Ice Beam, and also a Whiscash. And Body Slam doesn't quite take down the Whiscash, but it does deal quite a bit of damage. I go for Flamethrower into the Skarmory, taking it down in a single hit, and then all that's left is the Whiscash, who goes down to the Body Slam. So very easy, I pick up the TM for Thunderbolt, and I teach that to Wigglytuff, just so it has a special attacking type to help against Gorgon. He leads with a Lairon and a Celio, and I go for Thunderbolt into Celio, taking it down immediately. Then he brings out Slowking, and I go for Water Pulse into the Lairon to take it down immediately, which brings out Ursaring, and Thunderbolt to start dealing damage to Slowking. Unfortunately, not a one-shot. I get confused by Water Pulse, which is very unfortunate, because Clefable doesn't really have a great move to attack Slowking with, so I decide to use Ice Beam, which does luckily get the KO, and then he sends out a Shadow Primeape. Now, this could deal a lot of damage if I'm not able to take it down in a single turn, and unfortunately Body Slam doesn't do the job. Luckily, I do outspeed, so I am able to take it down, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, the Shadow Hypno, and Wigglytuff is able to get a Body Slam off on it as well. Brick Break comes out, not really doing that much to Wigglytuff despite Ursaring's really high base attack stat. I'm able to take down the Hypno. Ursaring gets taken down very low, gets attracted last second, and goes down to Ice Beam. Now this pairing is actually doing very well, however the end game is always much harder than just about everything else, so there is a chance they start to wane from here on. But anyway, let's go into the battle against Lavrina. She leads with a Gardevoir and a Gorbis. I go for Ice Beam into Gardevoir, not enough to take it down. It hits a Psychic into Wigglytuff, which lowers its special defense, which could be a problem later. I go for Thunderbolt, taking down the Gorbis in a single hit. Go for another Ice Beam, finishing off the Gardevoir, and then out comes Farfetch'd and the Roselia. Go for Body Slam into Farfetch'd, taking it down in a single hit as well. Then out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Altaria. The Roselia is able to set up Leech Seed, unfortunately, but it doesn't really matter at this point. Go for Ice Beam, take down Altaria in a single hit, and then Body Slam takes down Roselia. So with that, we beat Lavrina with relative ease. So now at the top of the volcano, we run into Snaddle once again, who has a Matang and Quagsire this time. I go for Ice Beam, taking Quagsire down to red, and Body Slam finishes it off, which then brings out his Scizor. And because it's 4 times weak to fire, I know for a fact it's not a threat whatsoever, so I go for Flamethrower into it, and then I use Thunderbolt to attack the following Pokemon, which is a Shadow Solrock. And even though Thunderbolt's not going to deal a ton of damage, it does do half to it, and as long as I'm able to outspeed, I know I can take it down on the following turn. Flamethrower comes out, taking Matang down, which brings out Castform, and Wigglytuff does outspeed, taking Solrock down with another Thunderbolt. And then out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Starmie. Go for Ice Beam into the Castform, and a Thunderbolt into Starmie. And unfortunately, Ice Beam doesn't finish off Castform, and Thunderbolt doesn't finish off Starmie, so it does take another turn. But they're not really all that threatening, they don't deal enough damage to take me down, so I'm able to finish off Snaddle on the first attempt pretty easily. So now moving on to Ardos, he leads with a Swallow and an Alakazam. And now, unfortunately, both of his Pokemon are absolutely going to outspeed me, so Swallow goes for Shadow Half, which isn't what I really like to see. And Alakazam goes for Psychic, taking Clefable down to 56. I go for Ice Beam to take down the Swallow, and then out comes Kingdra, and Body Slam takes down the Alakazam, bringing out the Heracross. Now, between these two, I absolutely need to get rid of the Heracross because it has Rock Tomb to either lower my speed or Mega Horn to deal a ton of damage. And once it goes down, out comes a Shadow Electabuzz, which I decided to go for Body Slam into, which might not have been the best idea because I get paralyzed due to its static ability. I go for Ice Beam to finish it off, and then out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Snorlax, which could be a problem because it's very specially defensive, and Clefable goes down to Kingdra. And unfortunately, after a Hydro Pump takes me down to 106, Snorlax hits me with a Shadow End, taking me down. So after another loss, I decide to go ahead and teach the move Protect to Clefable over Water Pulse, and then I go into the battle once again. Now with Protect in hand, I can Protect on the first turn to avoid this Shadow Half, and hopefully block Alakazam's Psychic. Unfortunately, it decides to target Wigglytuff, taking it down to 60 HP, but Wigglytuff does take it down with a Body Slam. Then out comes Kingdra once again. And at this point, I do need to make a decision. Do I want to take down the Kingdra or do I want to take down the Swallow? I decide that the Kingdra is going to be the thing I need to get rid of first, because the Swallow may or may not be locked into just using Shadow Half. If it is just using Shadow Half, it's not really a threat at all. However, if it isn't using Shadow Half, it might also be incredibly dangerous to keep around. So I decide to go for Thunderbolt to take it down, bringing out the Electabuzz once again, which unfortunately puts me in a kind of bad position where I need to get rid of Heracross as soon as possible. So I decide to risk it once again and go for Body Slam into the Electabuzz. And hopefully... oh, it went for Shadow Half. Oh, that's incredibly nice. Go for Body Slam, which luckily doesn't paralyze and takes down the Electabuzz. And now Snorlax is just above half health. Go for Ice Beam, not really doing that much damage, but Body Slam finishes it off. Third attempt Ardos isn't too bad. Now moving on to Gorgon, he leads with Slowking and Ursaring, and I go for Thunderbolt and Ice Beam into it. Now unfortunately, I still don't have a great move for dealing with Slowking, but this is the last Slowking of the run, so it doesn't really matter. Out comes Aggron to go for Ice Beam into Ursaring, which luckily gets a freeze, but I finish it off right away because I wasn't expecting it. Out comes Walrein, and Iron Tail hits, luckily not lowering my defense. I go for a Flamethrower and Thunderbolt, And one thing I hadn't really considered is that Walrein does have the Thick Fat ability, having all damage from fire type moves, effectively making it neutral, so I should have had that in mind. Go for another Flamethrower into Aggron, and it doesn't finish it off surprisingly, despite its very low special defense, and so it's able to hit again. But luckily, once again, no defense drop. Aggron is going to go down to Fruity Pebbles this following turn, so I decide to take down the Poliwrath, and just focus on the Shadow Mr. Mime coming out, which Body Slam takes it down in a single hit. Aggron hits one last Iron Tail and does put a good amount of power in it, getting a critical hit, but it's not enough, and Gorgon goes down. So now moving on to Eldus, he leads with a Shadow Manectric and Ninjask, and I want to get rid of the Manectric as soon as possible because it does like to set up Shadow Sky, but in this case it's actually going for Shadow End, so it halves its HP, allowing me to take it down in a single Ice Beam. Then out comes Salamence, which Thunderbolt does a decent amount of damage to. That should guarantee that Ice Beam does take it down on the following turn. Ninjask is just going for Silver Wind, and Shadow Rush takes Wigglytuff down to 17 HP, Salamence goes down, and then out comes Flygon. I go for Defense Curl, hoping that I can actually set up Rollout, and despite getting very close, Wigglytuff does survive, and I'm able to get off at least one Rollout. Out comes Shadow Marowak, Rollout takes down the Ninjask, and then out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Lapras. I go for Ice Beam into Marowak, which takes it down a single hit, and I go for Rollout into Lapras, dealing over half its health. It sets up Shadow Sky, which isn't enough to take down Wigglytuff. I go for Flamethrower, taking it down to low red, and Rollout finishes it off. So with that, we move on to the Big Box Legendary, Shadow Lugia, and honestly, it shouldn't really be that much of a threat. It doesn't deal that much damage to Clefable, go for Ice Beam, nearly doing half, and Thunderbolt takes it down to low yellow. I go for Protect with Clefable, and luckily it decides to attack it, and it goes down to a Thunderbolt. So now moving on to the final battle against Greevil, he leads with a Rhydon and a Moltres, and I go for Ice Beam into Rhydon, which does take it down in a single hit. Then out comes the Shadow Executor, and Moltres uses Shadow Fire, dealing an insane amount of damage to Clefable, with a crit though. I go for Ice Beam into the Executor, taking it down, and then out comes Tauros, unfortunately lowering my attack, but hopefully the Defense Curl is enough to offset that damage reduction, and unfortunately Moltres does survive with half HP, and the Shadow Fires are dealing quite a bit to it. The second rollout takes it down, out comes Articuno, Fruity Pebbles rain down, and Tauros goes for Shadow Hold, so on the following turn it will start attacking. Wigglytuff's down to 20 HP, Articuno goes down in a single hit, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, a Shadow Zapdos, but unfortunately Wigglytuff's taken way too much damage and goes down. So let's go back in for a second attempt now that I'm fully healed, and hopefully the Moltres doesn't get a couple crits right in a row. Go for Ice Beam just as before to take down the Rhydon, then out comes the Executor once again, Shadow Fire into Wigglytuff, still dealing a decent amount of damage. I decide to go for Thunderbolt this time, and I get a crit, taking it down in a single hit, which is very nice. Then out comes the Tauros, lowering my attack. I go for Thunderbolt into the Executor slot because I know Ice Beam will take it down in a single hit, and that will allow me to start dealing damage to the Articuno. But to my surprise, Wigglytuff gets a second crit against one of the legendary birds, taking it down in a single hit as well. And then out comes the Zapdos once again. And so I go for Ice Beam and Body Slam into it, hoping that it takes it down this turn. And Ice Beam surprisingly takes it down in a single hit, and Body Slam does half to Tauros. So after a round of Fruity Pebbles, I take down the Tauros, and we beat Greevil on the second attempt, which is actually really good. Especially considering their mediocre looking stats across the board. I was expecting this battle to take quite a few attempts. But anyway, just how well did these two end up doing? Well, they beat the game at a time of 9 hours, 47 minutes, and 20 seconds, with Clefable at level 63 and Wigglytuff at level 64, with only 9 faints throughout the entire game, 6 of those being to bosses, but only 3 of those being to random trainers. And in all honesty, I'm actually kind of surprised that these two lines did so well. Stats-wise, they're both average other than Wigglytuff's HP stat. Cute Charm is an ability that can sometimes come into play, but isn't all that useful to rely on. So that really just leaves their typing, which I think Normal type is a great type in this game, and their Move Pool, which is honestly incredible. So I'm glad these two did very well. In fact, I think they did great throughout most of the entire game. Of course, I did skip the baby phase more or less entirely, other than a level or two, and I also considered the early to mid-game being a bit more difficult, considering Clefairy and Jigglypuff just aren't actually that great, but they actually did a fairly decent job, really only having Lavrina as an issue. And once I got Wigglytuff and Clefable, they just kept going, so it's no surprise that they find themselves in the A tier. Now, they weren't completely perfect. Of course, battles took a bit longer because they aren't extremely powerful, but I do think that they are very reliable and consistent throughout the entire game, so they are very good. Anyway, if you did enjoy this video, consider liking and subscribing. If you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye!